Hey everyone, I'm Aidan Walls, and today I want to speak about why the Canon EOS R6 is not revolutionary. So the intro was to kind of get you a little bit riled up, but really what I want to talk about is one of the alternatives to the Canon EOS R6, because I was going through the specs the other night and I thought to myself, this is not revolutionary. This is just what the Canon EOS R should have been from the start. So in terms of competitors and cameras like the Sony a7 III, this is just kind of par for the course. So let's go through the specs, go through a little bit about each camera, and the alternative that I want to talk about is the FujiFilm X-T4. This is the X-T3 in my hand. So either one of those would be a great alternative because very similar, but the reason the X-T4 is comparative is that the X-T4 has IBIS and the EOS R6 also has IBIS. So in terms of brand decisions that we have to make as camera buyers, there actually aren't a lot of brands out there. I mean, Olympus just fell by the wayside. We'll see what happens there. But you've got Panasonic, which is micro four thirds, and then their new full frame range. There's Leica, which obviously is a very high-end option. You've got Nikon, which also Nikon are struggling, and I don't know, not a lot of people seem to be jumping onto the Z mount side of things. You've got Canon, who still dominate and are going to continue to dominate with the new R lineup. And then you've got Fuji. I have been a Fuji supporter ever since I bought my FujiFilm X-H1, and for good reason. It was just a lovely camera, a beautiful camera to use. These cameras are great to hold in the hand. They're solidly built. There's a lot to love about the FujiFilm brand. But I'm not sponsored by Fuji in any way, shape or form. I know the guys at Fuji, but I'm not loyal to them in any way. You know, if you go through my reviews, I will slam them for doing wrong things and I will praise them for doing right things. I just love what Fuji are doing, but the main reason I use Fuji is because it is affordable. It's very well positioned in the affordability spectrum. I chose the X-H1 over the Sony a7 III purely because it was just a very affordable option, and I really like the color coming out of these cameras. And when it comes to Canon, I really enjoyed the Canon EOS R. I made a big kind of funny joke about the 4K crop. So this is the 4K on the Canon EOS R. It is a 1.7 crop. That's just insane. The camera right next to it is my Fuji X-T30. It is a 10,000 Rand camera. I think retailing now at about 14. I got it at Black Friday for 10,000 Rand, but 10,000 versus a 32,000 Rand camera. That's insane. That's for, you know what, for me, that's a deal breaker. You Canon, you. It's a great camera. It's a beautiful camera, and a lot of people are using it with excellent results, and external recorders work very well with it. It's a great camera. And so even I was thinking maybe I should jump ship to Canon. You know, the R6 is now finally the Canon camera to buy. But before you jump into it, let's look at some of the specs and compare it specifically to Fuji and what they have to offer, because Fuji just is a great option. You know, it's difficult to compare a micro four thirds camera to a full frame camera. I think that the APS-C is just perfectly positioned. So let's compare the X-T4, which has IBIS and is very comparable to the EOS R6. Let's compare those two cameras. So IBIS, as I mentioned, they both have IBIS. Secondly, full frame versus APS-C. Now, I've been using the X-T3 and I've been blown away. We're about to launch today or tomorrow a video talking about the HLG on this camera. It is just phenomenal, and the low light performance on this isn't as bad as you'd expect, and that's what people immediately go to with full frame. Also the background blur, which again is something, you know, it depends on the user, what you're looking for. But at the end of the day, I don't think APS-C versus full frame is as big a deal as everyone's making out. Obviously, marketing has a lot to do with that. I get great low light performance with my Fuji cameras. It's not as good as full frame, but there's actually very few situations where I need hectic low light performance out of my camera. And then on that camera, I'm using the 56mm 1.2. It's a very fast lens, which means it lets in a lot of light, and I get great low light performance with that lens. And it's a spectacular lens. It's probably one of the best lenses of all the brands of all time. It's one of the best lenses of all time. It just is beautiful. So long story short, I don't think APS-C versus full frame is as big a deal as people make out. I think it depends from person to person, and I think it depends on what you're trying to do. Moving on. Depth of field. Full frame is better. There's just no way around it. I mean, I had an f4, so if you're new to photography and videography, an f-stop kind of controls how much light comes into the camera, and an f4 is worse than an f1.2 in terms of light and also background blur. Now the full frame with f4 was giving me more background blur than my kit's f.28 lens, so you're definitely getting more background blur and better depth of field out of full frame. But Fuji, their older lineup of lenses, the 35 1.4, the 23 1.4, the 56 1.2, all those lenses let in a lot of light and have great background blur, and they're just exceptional. They're beautiful lenses, and it's one of the reasons why I've stuck around with Fujifilm. So video specs and codecs, kind of spoiler alert, I think Fuji, besides the fact that they do 420 and not 422 10-bits, Fuji kind of top out on this. So Canon does 10-bit 422 internally, while the X-T4 does 420 internally, 10-bit 420. This just means that the X-T4 and the X-T3 have slightly less color to work with in post-production. You can get 422 with an external recorder with the Fuji. This is quite a big deal, but not as big a deal as, say, 8-bit versus 10-bit. So in terms of 422 versus 420, you know, I've got 8 bits on my Fujifilm X-H1, and it's a massive jump from the Fujifilm X-H1 to the Fujifilm X-T3 because of that 10-bit internal. They both do technically all intra H.265 compression, but the Fuji does that throughout all the codecs and all the frame rates. The Canon EOS R6, it only does all intra compression with the time lapse. So actually, technically, it doesn't actually do all intra. And it's difficult for me to give you an example of that on YouTube because of all the compression. But when I shoot all intra versus long op, which is type of compressions on these cameras, I get way more detail. What the compression means is long op takes one frame, compares it to all the frames in front of it, and then compresses them together to determine which pixels need to be reused and which can be compressed and not reused, if that makes any sense. It's a compression way of compressing, whereas all intra takes every frame individually and compresses them each individually on their merit, which creates far more detail for moving objects. You know, if you're taking a video of the trees rustling, you're going to get far more detail with all intra. The Fuji has an edge in bit rates with a maximum of 400 megabits per second 4K at 200 megabits in HD, while the Canon's bit rates drop as you go through the frame rates and resolutions. So we'll flash those on the screen as I'm speaking now. They both do slow motion, with the Fuji doing 240 frames per second in HD and the Canon only doing 120 frames per second in HD. They both do 4K 60 frames per second, but the Canon seems to have a few more limitations on which resolutions and frame rates you can use, and the all intra compression and all that. So as I explained, the all intra is actually only reserved for time lapses. So long story short, the Fuji doesn't do 422 10-bit, but in every other respect, it kind of tops out the Canon. It does 240 frames per second slow motion. It does all intra throughout the spectrum. It has a better bitrate options. As you go down to HD, you don't have as high bit rates as you do on the Fuji. So in summary, the Fuji is better, in my opinion. Lenses. So I have to admit, Canon lenses are phenomenal. It's the reason I would switch to the Canon R system. Their lenses are just stunning. The RF lenses, they're going to be bringing more and more out. They just launched more with the new launch of the R5 and the R6. Those lenses are phenomenal. So Fuji have your aperture ring here. They have a ring, I think it's in the front of the lens, or it might be in the front of the lens, but it's a mappable ring that you can use for anything. You can use it for ISO, whatever. and the lenses just are beautiful. They are just stunning, stunning lenses. They really are nice. Fuji lenses have character, but as many people complain, a lot of them are a little bit outdated. The autofocus on the 56 f1.2 is really bad. You know, they are a little bit slow on the autofocus and a few other performance issues, but the lenses are beautiful. So, you know, that is something to consider if you are, you know, wanting to get perfectly performing lenses. The Canon's the way to go, but the lenses are horrifically expensive as well. You're paying at least double or more per lens for the R system, whereas the Fuji lenses, as kind of quirky as they are beautiful, and they are much cheaper. Still expensive, but much cheaper. And then battery life. I think it stands to be tested, but I'm pretty sure the battery life on the X-T4 is better than the R6, because all they did was optimize the battery slightly and optimize the software to use the battery life. Whereas the Fuji system got a battery that's pretty much 3 times the power of the old battery, so definitely better battery life there. They both have articulating screens, both are exceptional. Canon are known to have a lovely interface, so probably Canon's a little bit better there on the touch interface and all that kind of thing, but both fully articulating screens. I mentioned when I used the X-T4, lovely screen, beautiful screen. What I can say is this, as I mentioned in the beginning, the R5 is revolutionary. 8K raw output, absolutely mind-boggling, but the R6 is not. The R6 is the Canon EOS R rebooted. It is what it should have been from the start. It does get me very excited because finally Canon are producing a really nice mirrorless camera, and that's very exciting for Canon users and for everyone really, because it's going to create more competition in the market, and that's good for us consumers. And you know, like Canon now have brought out the R6 and they're saying it's revolutionary, but it's kind of like Apple bringing out widgets on their phones. You know, everyone's like, we had widgets on some of our Nokias, some of our Sony Ericssons had widgets. It's kind of like everyone's been there. The A7 III was revolutionary when it came out, and it was truly revolutionary. The Fuji X-T4 is a beautiful and almost perfect camera. Canon really have just basically come to the party. What Canon bring is, just like Apple do, just the power of who they are. They're a big company, and now people are going to buy their cameras. But in terms of whether you should buy the R6, there's still a lot of competition out there. You know, I love the Panasonic G9. It's an old camera that's been rebooted with firmware, and it's pretty much a competitor for the R6. The GH5 is also, and all these cameras are cheaper than the R6. The FujiFilm X-T4, cheaper than the R6. They're all cheaper and they're all good contenders. The A7 III, Sony A7 III, getting a little bit old. Maybe we should all wait out for the A7 IV, because that thing is going to be a beast. I wouldn't be surprised if they do raw video output on the A7 III and it's going to be cheaper or same price as the R6. And if Fuji develop raw output for their X-T4, then we're in for an interesting debate and interesting competition. So I hope this was helpful. I hope this helped you decide. I think if you are in the market, definitely look at the competitors. They've been doing it for a while, and they've been doing it well. You know, Panasonic, Sony, Fuji, they've all got the features that the R6 have. So check them out before you go for the R6. But by all means, beautiful, beautiful camera. Well done, Canon, for finally developing a camera that pretty much everyone would be happy to buy. Thanks so much for watching. Please subscribe to my channel. Please like this video, share it with your friends, and help me spread the word. I'll see you in the next one.